If you're in Meyer, this is the real question. How do you redesign your city in a way that measurably improves everyday life without losing strategic control in the process? Paris offers a real world case study. Not a perfect one, but a bold one. And both cities move forward. My name is Alex Salin. I'm the founder of Better and the creator of AI City Brain, decision intelligence system designed to help cities manage complexity and implement long-term urban strategy. I work at the intersection of governance, data, and spatial transformation, helping city leaders turn vision into measurable outcomes. This time, I will show you Paris as a case study in city leadership, long term collaboration, and the kind of governance that makes structural change possible. A city becomes unique through repeated reinvention. Paris feels unique, partly because it has a history of reinvention. The most radical transformation took place in the 19th century under Napoleon III and Haussmann. Since then, the city has evolved through infrastructure expansion, metropolitan restructuring, and symbolic architectural projects. But today's shift toward proximity, walkability, and public space is arguably the most systematic redesign of everyday urban life since the Haussmann era. The common denominator remains consistent: leadership that commits, a vision sustained over years, and implementation that continues even under pressure. The 21st century transformation, proximity over traffic. Paris built a clear planning narrative around proximity, often described as the 15-minute city associated with Carlos Moreno and implemented politically under Mayor Anne Hidalgo. This approach prioritizes everyday access: schools, groceries, healthcare, parks, daily services, reachable within a short walk or cycle. The strongest proof of Paris' transformation arises through real behavioral data, not slogans. In central Paris in 2022-2023, mobility statistics show that 53.3% of trips were made on foot, 30% by public transport, 11.2% by bicycle, only 4.3% by car. These figures indicate a city where walking and shared mobility dominate everyday movement. To put these numbers into context, in London, around 67% of trips are made by walking, cycling, or public transport combined. That means most daily journeys do not rely on private cars. In New York City, by contrast, about 62% of commuters still use cars or similar vehicles. That contrast highlights a key point. Paris today functions very differently from many other global cities. Instead of relying on private cars as the default mobility mode, walking, cycling, and mass transit are the normal everyday choices for most journeys. So that 4.3% matters. It signals a city that redesigned its mobility hierarchy rather than adding a few projects around the edges. Implementation. What changed in the street network? Since 2020, Paris has added 84 kilometers of new cycle lanes, and cycling increased by 71% following the pandemic period. At the same time, the city has systematically reduced space allocated to private cars. Reuters reports that 10,000 parking spaces have been removed since 2020, with a further 10,000 planned in connection with continued pedestrianization. The public mandate for the next phase has also been made explicit. Paris residents voted in favor of converting 500 additional streets into pedestrian-friendly green corridors, often described as green lungs. This would bring the total close to 700 streets, more than 10% of all streets in the city. The most consequential outcome of spatial relocation is well understood. When a city relocates space, everyday life changes. Streets cease to function solely as a traffic corridors and become places where people stay. Walking and cycling increase repeated local contact, strengthen neighborhood and stabilize local economic flows. This reinforces urban resilience, so the capacity of a city to function and develop even under pressure. Health outcomes shift in parallel. Daily physical activity embedded in the urban structure supports long-term well-being, and large cohort studies associate regular cycling with a 17 to 40% lower risk of premature mortality. As a city leader, you already know this evidence. The link between urban form, longevity, and well-being is firmly established. The World Health Organization has formalized this relationship into a decision support framework, the Health Economic Assessment Tool, HEAT. HEAT helps cities calculate the economic value of walking and cycling by estimating how many premature deaths are prevented and converting those health benefits into monetary terms. It was designed to support public decision making so that investments in active mobility can be evaluated as rigorously as other transport projects. I have recorded a dedicated episode explaining how the WHO HEAT framework can be integrated into structured urban governance and long-term strategy. You will find the link below. The political reality. How Paris manages friction. Structural change generates resistance. Reducing cars' dominance affects commuters from the metropolitan periphery, freight and logistic operations, daily routines, and deeply ingrained expectations about mobility freedom. The tension is especially visible at the edges of the urban area, where car dependency remains high and commute distances are longer. Paris has not ignored this friction. The city, together with the wider metropolitan governance system, addresses it through multi-level coordination and traveled measures. Restrictions on car traffic in central Paris, including the limited traffic zone introduced in late 24, were implemented incrementally. The approach combined regulatory clarity with transition periods and communication campaigns before full enforcement. This sequencing was deliberate. It allowed commuters and businesses to adapt rather than react defensively to sudden change. Second, transport governance in the wide Ile-de-France region is not controlled by the city of Paris alone. A regional authority, Ile-de-France Mobilité, oversees public transport planning, ticketing, scheduling, and system integration across Paris and its suburbs. This metropolitan coordination ensures that mobility changes in the city center are supported by transit improvements that extend beyond it. One example is a single regional platform with hotlines supported by AI-powered service system. It guides users across the whole metropolitan network. The rollout was phased, refined over time, and today it functions in everyday operation. Third, beyond road restrictions, authorities are investing in new forms of regional transit infrastructure to address spatial equity directly. In late 24, the Ile-de-France region inaugurated its first urban cable car line. Fourth, political legitimacy is built through consultation. Local referenda, neighborhood councils, and metropolitan planning forums operate across the wider region, not only in the city center. This gives suburban stakeholders a formal role in shaping mobility policy. The approach doesn't remove controversy, but it allows the transformation to proceed with institutional continuity and metropolitan coordination. Paris has done this before, the 19th century transformation. To understand why today's Paris feels structurally coherent, we need to return to 19th century. At that time, the city functioned as a dense medieval fabric, narrow streets, overcrowding, and poor sanitation. In 1832, a cholera epidemic killed over 18,000 residents, more than 2% of the population. By comparison, deaths directly contributed to COVID-19 in Paris during the first year of the pandemic remained below 0.2%. The earlier crisis exposed a profound structural weakness in the city's urban form. Napoleon III appointed Georges-Eugène Haussmann to lead a large-scale urban modernization program. Nearly 20,000 buildings were demolished and roughly 34,000 constructed. Wide boulevards replaced narrow alleys. Parks and major public spaces were created. Water and sewer systems were comprehensively rebuilt. Strict building regulations reshaped the city's visual order. Heights were standardized, facades aligned along continuous cornice lines, and balconies organized in horizontal bands that structured entire avenues. The roofscape became equally defining. Mansard roofs, widely applied under 19th century regulations, formed a continuous zinc-clad skyline, typically above 5 or 6-story buildings with aligned dormer windows. This coherence, beautiful coherence, was not a static coincidence. It was regulatory governance applied at scale. Much of Paris' visual identity and a significant part of its operational coherence still stems from that moment of structural redesign. Two transformations, one recurring pattern. The 19th century used demolition and infrastructure. The 21st century uses reallocation and proximity. Different tools, the same governance logic. Clear doctrine, political backing, operational framework, and consistency over time. Paris shows that reinvention is not an event, it's a capability. The strategic lesson here is the real choice every leadership team faces. Incremental change that protects comfort or structural change that reshapes and accepts disagreement. Paris repeatedly chooses the second path, and the metrics confirm it. Walking dominates the city center. Cycling continues to grow. Car use remains marginal. This is not branding. It's a redesigned urban hierarchy. Why this matters for better AI cities? Technology doesn't replace governance. It strengthens it if doctrine already exists. Cities benefit from decision intelligence when they have a long-term direction, clear targets, and a will to improvement. This is why we build AI City Brain, to translate strategy into execution, to coordinate data across departments, to move from isolated projects to systemic outcomes. Paris demonstrates what alignment looks like. AI helps leadership teams accelerate coordination and maintain clarity as complexity grows. At the end, I have a small addition for those of you planning to visit Paris. Over the years, I have been building a personal Google map of the city. I kept adding places I visited, places I read about, and places recommended to me in conversation with people who live there or return often. Gradually, the list grew, becoming more extensive and more complete. What began as a personal habit slowly evolved into something genuinely useful in my work as well. The map is now broad and comprehensive enough that I thought it might be worth sharing. It may offer you a particular lens on the city and perhaps make exploring it easier. In the future, I will also be sharing curated maps of other cities developed in a similar way. Last autumn at Adapt AI in the Grand Palais, I listened to Philippe Aghion speak about innovation and long-term growth. His central argument was simple. Structural change requires persistence. Cities are no different. Paris remains controversial. This is a sign of movement. Its uniqueness comes from repeated reinvention and from leaders who stay consistent long enough for the city to adjust. If you're leading a city today, the reminder is clear. Doctrine plus implementation creates measurable quality of life, and continuity is the real competitive advantage.